lot of you already know Lindsay. I'm not going to gush too much, but she is an award-winning product and design leader. She currently works as lead information architect at Comcast. And let's just give Lindsay a warm welcome. She's going to talk more about herself.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out. I know it's a school night. I'm really, really nervous because I'm in a room talking to some of the smartest people that I know in my life, some of the smartest people that I've ever worked with. I want to say a quick thank you to Eastern Standard and Nicole and everybody for putting this whole thing together. And David Thomas, who's actually not here today. Shout out to him wherever he is. And kind of this is what you're in for today. I'm not going to read it out loud to you because you're all very smart people. But I am just going to dive into it and talk a little bit about me. My name is Lindsay Grow, and anybody who knows me well knows that I'm an avid dog enthusiast, right? And everybody thinks that their dog is the best dog, and everybody is right. I currently live in South Philadelphia. I did get to meet Gritty, and it is true, when you shake his hands, they squeak. It's the best part about him. Tara can attest to that. And then, she is a pit bull mix, just a little rescue from ACCT. And then, currently I work as an information architect at Comcast, and my focus is on entertainment design, X1 and Stream. And as an information architect, I'm constantly thinking about semantics and the language that people are using, right? And I had a hell of a time coming up with the title of this talk because I was realizing as I was digging into it and doing more research that the language was changing based on where the experience was occurring rather than what type of experience people were having, right? So let's just dive into it, dark patterns, right? People have probably heard this term. This was a term coined by this guy, Harry Brignall, who I got to talk to about preparing for this talk. And he started this website called darkpatterns.org, and it's basically a place where people kind of submit dark patterns that they find all around the web. Not just the web, but also enterprise business systems, any kind of digital experience, right? And on his site, he kind of started categorizing all of these dark patterns into these buckets. And I just want to say that a dark design pattern is not the same thing as a bad design, right? A bad design can happen because of inexperience or lack of research. A dark pattern is a very intentional thing. The way that Brignall defines it is an intentional act of psychological UX trickery. So let's take a look at an example of that. First example I want to show you is this little mobile banner for a little Craigslist chat app, right? So does anybody see anything that kind of stands out to you about this banner? Maybe some of the people in the front? If you're holding this on your phone kind of closer to your face, you might realize that there's a little speck of grime right here, right? That's actually designed into the banner. So when people see that grime, they try to scrape it off with their fingernail, and they click the banner, it generates ad revenue. It's a success. It's a short-sighted success, but it is successful, right? Let's look at another example of this.
We have a shadow.
Oh.
Oh, no.
That was not dark design.
Even audibly makes strange. Krista.
Maybe the projector's on its way?
Let me try to read.
Right? The sound is creepy.
Wait. Something's happening?
There
Okay. Here's another example of that kind of UX trickery, right? You see this ad, it's a mobile ad, it's got this big hair photoshopped right across the ad, right? You think that's a mistake, you see it on your phone, you just try to swipe away the hair and you click into the ad. right? And these are examples of what Brignall defines as UX trickery. This is a type of trickery. And Brignall, his focus was primarily on interface design, but as I started looking through kind of examples of this type of work, I started thinking there was a much broader problem that we could be talking about and addressing. So what I started thinking about is, well, I think most of the people in the room here would agree with me when I say that user experience isn't always a digital experience, right? A user experience can be a physical experience as well, right? And there are so many parallels happening between the physical and the digital when it comes to dark design that it would be a disservice to talk about one and not the other. So here are some of the words that people are using to describe dark designs, right? Under the digital umbrella, we have dark patterns, unpleasant design, exclusionary design. Under the physical side, you have hostile architecture, defensive urban design, and something called crime prevention through environmental design. These are all just different names for a crappy experience, right? But I tried to be a little more professional and give it a definition. Intentionally difficult user experiences that are designed to prevent unwanted behavior. And I think that these experiences are like the two words out of that definition that I would focus on most is intentional and prevention. So let's look at an example of a physical preventative design. This is something called the Camden bench, right? This bench, I think, is defined more by what it isn't than what it is, right? And I'm sorry guys, I'm fascinated with benches, and I'm gonna talk a lot about benches today. I almost did the whole talk about benches. You're welcome that I didn't, but I am gonna kind of keep bringing them up. But you can see here that the goals around the Camden bench are all preventative ones. Prevent skateboarding, no sleeping, you can't house a litter in it, and you can't hide drugs in it, right? You can sit on it, it is possible to sit on. But this is, again, this is intentional, this is more than just trickery. Let's look at another intentional dark design. This one, it's a video, and Brignall would categorize this as a roach motel, which means it's a design that's really easy to get into a situation and really difficult for the user to get out of a situation. So I'm going to throw a little bit of shade here, but I'm just going to say that they did find this flow and update it and fix it and recognize that they could do better, right? But up until May of last year, this was the design. So I just want to ask, has anybody ever tried to cancel their Amazon Prime account?
Yes.
If you tried to cancel your Amazon Prime account before May of last year, you would have to go through this flow that I'm about to show you. So you go to the homepage, and you probably would think that the way to cancel your account is under the account drop-down, right? There's actually no place under the account drop-down where you can cancel your account. What you have to do is scroll all the way to the very bottom of the page, click into the help section. Under help, you have to scroll to the very last link, need more help. Under more help, contact us. After contact us, the very last tab, Prime or something else, and then you get a drop down. In the drop down, you somehow have to know to click login and security. After login and security, a second drop down appears, and there it is, the magical close my account option. Except for clicking into that doesn't do anything but pop up a window to a retention agent who's trying to stop it. Can't make this stuff up, people. But again, this is more than just a trickery like the hair or the piece of grime, right? This was designed around prevention of people unsubscribing, right? And it does work, that's why people do it. But I like to think about what would have happened if instead of stop people from unsubscribing, they redefined the goal as something like find out why people want to unsubscribe, right? They would have gotten further. Another just quick thing I wanted to mention was LinkedIn. back in 2015, if you signed up for LinkedIn and let them, and if you signed up for LinkedIn back then and let them access your contacts, you were unknowingly giving them permission to contact all of your contacts on your behalf. So they would send your contacts emails and sign your name to them. So we were kind of unknowingly harassing each other. Turns out it's a huge violation of privacy. They learned their lesson. They no longer do it. But what's interesting to me about this example was it was really thought out, right? It was very deliberate. It was executively approved dark pattern, right? And it worked. But you know what, like, we all can probably agree that this kind of thing is unethical, but it's persisting, right? And it's growing in popularity. Now, I know that today I can't solve world peace. I can't solve the problem of dark patterns, but we can start thinking about how we can redesign goals to encourage good behavior rather than try to prevent behavior. The things that dark design have in common, they're intentional, they're preventative, and they work, and they rarely solve the root issue. And also, dark designs can affect people, but also animals. These are pigeon spikes. And they work. The pigeons stopped pooping on people's cars after these were put up. They did move the problem and congregate in higher numbers in your neighbor's tree and poop on cars there. But again, it's intentional, it's preventative, and it works, but it doesn't solve the root issue. Another type of dark physical design is something called crime prevention through environmental design, right? And this is a design philosophy that's utilized mostly in urban planning. It's basically the use of civil engineering to achieve social engineering. And there are 4 primary pillars to this type of design. The first is natural surveillance, right? So this kind of maximizes the natural visibility or observation. So it creates a perception of risk. There's nowhere to like hide or duck behind. The second is access control, right? You funnel people into and out of a place through a certain method, right? The third one is territoriality. It's a concept to kind of clearly delineate public and private space. You can see that this bar here makes it feel like everything over there is private and everything here is public. And the fourth is maintenance. This one's easy. If you see a piece of litter on the ground, you're more likely to throw litter on the ground. So these 4 things together prevent crime when you design to them, right? And as I started researching and preparing for this talk, the more I was learning about it, the more I was walking through the city and realizing that I see this everywhere in Philadelphia. If you ever walk into a bathroom and there's blue lighting, that's to stop drug dealers from being able to see their names and their arms. If you ever walk past the 7-Eleven at 17th and JFK, you notice that they're blasting classical music really loud. That's because there was a bunch of teenagers who would congregate there after class. So now from 3 to 6-ish, they blast classical music. They also have things like sprinklers for humans, which is, they're not actually watering plants, they're just motion activated. And then there's something I had to mention called the ultrasonic teenage youth deterrent. It's a real thing. You can buy it on Amazon, and it's basically this tiny little box that you can place in your place of business on the wall or something, and it emits like a frequency that people only 18 and under can hear.
No.
So they leave, and you have no children around in your establishment. I just had to mention that one. It sounds really cool. But I mean, you walk through a city and you can have a good or a bad experience. Some people here might recognize this bench on the blue line, right? And there's an entire field of study around the psychology of cities. And if we design space for conflict, I think we have conflict. There's something that's happening that's called the war on sitting. It's a thing. It has a Wikipedia page. And I just think it's wild, right? Like, designers making something that inherently works against itself. It's like contradictory design. Here's a couple more benches. This one is in West Philly. Some of you might recognize that one. It's across from the Comcast Center. But it's not just to prevent homeless people from sleeping there, right? Like, it's to prevent people from sitting there for too long. But it also poses an issue to people, elderly people and people with disabilities as well, because there's not a backrest or anywhere to lean. And again, these kind of designs displace the issue, and they don't actually solve anything. They don't dismantle the issue. Does anybody recognize these benches?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I just want to talk about Love Park for a minute. Back in 2014, they decided to redesign Love Park. I was so psyched about this because I walked through that area every day on my way to work, on my way home from work. And, you know, it needed a facelift. You know, there was gum, like the big, like, tiered slabs were a little loose. And, you know, it was really tired. But it did work remarkably well as a public space because, you know, these tiered elements, they, you know, you could sit on it. It felt like an escape from the streets. It was actually, fun fact, so valuable to the skateboarding community that they offered Philly $1 million to upkeep it and let skaters continue to skate there. There's some skateboarders. So during the redesign, like Parks and Recs did an amazing job, right? Like they went out and they did lots of civic engagement. They asked people for feedback and sketches. They did amazing research. I was so excited the park was gonna get a facelift. I was excited to hear it was gonna improve accessibility. There's gonna be more green space. One specific thing that I found when I was researching this was a little kid had an idea to like sculpt, like put in a sculpture of a skateboarder to commemorate the people that made our park so famous. I thought that was really cute. I mean, here's a word cloud of some of the public's feedback. Look at how positive Philly was.
Yes.
Philly, public. Like, whew, so good. I do think that a lot of the city's goals, however, were geared more towards the philosophy of crime prevention through environmental design that I just talked through, right? So this, I think we can all agree with, sometimes there's conflicting goals, and sometimes good research does not equate to good design. You know, the public versus the city goals were contradictory, just like a lot of the time business versus your end user goals are contradictory. But the problem in this scenario, I think, is like the city's goal had the proverbial big chicken wing at the dinner table, so their goals were kind of prioritized over everything else. And this is where we landed. You can see here there's a lot of natural surveillance, there's kind of nowhere to hide or duck behind. It's discouraging lingering for long periods. There's controllable public features. So the fountains and the they have these chairs that they can move, and they can turn the fountain off, so they can kind of turn off the park. And I feel that this park will only really truly come alive with commercialization. I'm sure, however, that the crime has decreased. But I also think that the public space might have also, the public use might have also decreased. So as I said before, there's an entire field of study around the psychology of cities. And I would diagnose this park with depression. I think that a lot like the Camden bench, it's defined more by what it is not than what it is. And hopefully after this talk, some of you will be able to notice some of the small details that make this park feel like a dark design. Here's a big grate that kind of forces people to go in and out of the park in a certain method. Here's a planter that's a little too short to sit on comfortably, along with skateboarding, anti-skateboarding rings. And it's estimated that by 2050, 70% of the global population will be living in cities. And I think that we can make it our task to reimagine the landscape, right? Like, here's some pictures I took on my way to work, where you can see that it's not solving the issue of homelessness with this redesign. This gentleman somehow found a recliner and hauled it over to Love Park. And you can see he's sleeping on it next to the bench that's designed to deny him. But you know, we've gotten it right before. Right around the same time that Love Park was opening, there was this experimental park that was opening as well at 40th and Lancaster called an urban thinkscape. And it was supported by the William Penn Foundation. And the idea was that to design a park with a collaboration of designers and architects and psychologists. And this park was kind of the opposite. It was like encouraging good behavior, not trying to control public behavior. And the goals were around prevention. I can't tell you yet because Love Park and this park are so new that if they work to reduce crime, but I can tell you that I would much rather hang out in this one. So, as a UX designer, and I'm sure that there's a lot of researchers and content strategists here, like our job every day when we go to work is to kind of fight for the end user. And I think that it's important to think about how we can do that in our community as well. Let's take a look at what have others done. The first one I want to talk about is this guy, Stuart Semple. And I nerded out so hard because I got to talk to him. But he's this color creator based out of Chicago, and he got in this epic nerdy paint creation battle with the designer of the Bean. It's amazing. But anyway, he started these art interventions at these benches, and he turns them into love benches, and he raises money for homeless charities. He also creates these design crime stickers that he sells on his website that also goes to charity. Sarah Ross is somebody else I wanted to mention. She's a researcher out in California that designs these, what she calls ARCA suits. And the suits include the negative space and the structures that allow the wearer to kind of fit into places that are designed to deny them. And I just think that's really cool. She gives these out to the homeless after she makes them. Another thing I want to mention is there's a movement happening called Guerrilla Public Service, and this guy here is an anonymous artist that was kind of sick of the city neglecting his bus stops, so he started creating his own benches at them. And other examples of this kind of movement, people who put up their own traffic signs where they're needed. And then there's also this kind of movement of people who build their own tiny free libraries when there's no libraries in the area. An interesting way also to inform others is just creating these sites, right? I think that recognizing the dark designs is the first step towards finding the right solution. Here's one more example I wanted to share. This is called the Hello Bench, and it was designed by a coffee company of anything. No? Yeah. But it basically does the opposite.
Oh my god.
So this is basically the opposite of designing for prevention, right? This is designing for encouragement. And it reduces the physical gap between people. It's also super memorable. And as I was thinking about this bench, I told you I do a lot of bench thinking. I was also realizing that this bench takes off a lot of the same goals that the preventative ones do, right? This is movable, it's sleep-proof, it's drug and litter-proof. So I think there is an element of compromise that we can consider, just like what we have to do when we have to design within a set of constraints at work, right? We can find a compromise. I mean, on Eastern Standard's website, they say design is problem solving, and I think that this is a problem that we can solve. That's what we do, right? So again, I'm not here with all the answers, just a lot of questions. There's no easy solutions to the problem of dark patterns, but I think that if we can recognize them in our digital lives as well as our physical lives, we can work together to start to find solutions.